Command decision taking place right now as I speak. I was going to open the program today talking about a couple of issues on the local level, but just as I was settling into the chair at 8 o'clock this morning, I looked up at the monitor on the wall, and Hillary Clinton was speaking to the media before boarding an airplane in Westchester County, New York, where the Clintons have a home, and she was in New York City last night for a forum, which dealt somewhat primarily with military issues. And the reason she was out there this morning, and as a longtime political observer, I can tell you what she's trying to do is damage control because her performance last night was rough. So this was an opportunity for her to try to go out this morning and tell the media that Donald Trump was a dangerous man and that Donald Trump is not a patriotic man and that Donald Trump is dissing the U.S. military. And she's trying to pull all of these things out in order to deflect all of the attention from the struggles she had last night when she started getting questions about her email and the fact that she obviously broke the law, although no charges followed from that. In fact, there's a piece this morning coming from FBI Director James Comey trying to defend himself because he's been called a bit of a gutless wonder. The guy's about 7 feet tall and apparently a couple stones short of actually coming up with some serious prosecution after the evidence that had been gathered against this woman. And I'll break some of this down this morning. Clinton was on TV last night and she got asked a couple of questions about this and she fumbled and stumbled and she may have actually lied again when she repeated that she had no idea there was classified material there and she didn't send anything or just, the same story she's been giving for months on end, even though it differs from some of that testimony she gave to the FBI that was released last week. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 53. Here's the thing. This is how bad it is for her. Her sycophants, her minions in mainstream media, are now trying to argue that it wasn't the proper place for these questions last night. Now, some of the people asking her the questions are retired military people, and they believe that someone who exposes classified secrets endangers the country. So I think they have the right to do it. But I flipped on, it was painful, I flipped on Morning Joe today for a few brief minutes on over at MSDNC, and Mika Brzezinski was sitting there saying, oh, but this wasn't the right place for those questions. Well, what is the right place? Come on. In other words, Mika, who I mentioned yesterday, her father is the former Democrat and national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski. He, along with Jimmy Carter, gave away the Panama Canal, and they also turned Iran over to the Mad Mullahs, who are still bedeviling us to this day, nearly 40 years down the road. So she was sitting there trying to throw her girl a life preserver, if you will, this morning. But increasingly, it looks like that's not going to be working. Donald Trump, of course, he won the coin flip last night, so he was allowed to go second, which meant Mrs. Clinton didn't have time to badmouth him while she was actually on the air. She had to go first. And he was questioned about his views about Russia and Vladimir Putin, and I want you to take a listen to what he had to say, but this is some of what Mrs. Clinton is fuming about this morning.
Russia wants to defeat ISIS as badly as we do. If we had a relationship with Russia, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could work on it together and knock the hell out of ISIS? The man has very strong control over a country. Now, it's a very different system, and I don't happen to like the system, but certainly in that system, he's been a leader far more than our president has been a leader.
Keep in mind that he may not be the nicest guy. We're talking about Putin, a leader in Russia. However, we were allied with Stalin, or Stalin as it was pronounced, Joseph Stalin. Not his real name, by the way. That was a party name that they adopted when they were still an underground communist party and they needed to avoid the secret police. It just means man of steel, or it's named after the Stalin River, the Steel River in Russia. We were allied with him to defeat the enemies that we had in common in World War II. And he was a far worse person than Vladimir Putin ever will be. At least from what we can see as Putin's career unfolds. He's been doing this for 20 years, and he may not be the nicest guy on the planet, but he didn't starve yet 10 million of his countrymen as Stalin did. She, though, as I pointed out earlier, may have openly been lying in a response about her email from a question from a member of the audience at the forum last night.
Classified material has a header which says top secret, secret, confidential. Nothing, and I will repeat this, and this is verified in the report by the Department of Justice. None of the emails sent or received by me had such a header.
See, no, there you go. That's wrong. That's that last part about that. That is not verified by these people. It's quite clear from the report that came out last Friday that they were well aware of this, and she just feigned ignorance when she was being interviewed. I'm telling you, folks, this is not going to get better for her. And the only thing media can do is try to continue to point fingers at Trump. One of the allegations being made is he insulted the military because he said that Obama and Clinton had reduced our generals to rubble. In other words, they've beaten them down. Let me tell you a little story. I have a friend of mine named Scott McConnell. Scott was in the Army for many, many years. Scott actually introduced me one time to a woman by the name of Michelle Malkin, who you may know. Michelle Malkin was writing a book, and Scott is included in one of the chapters in the book because of some of his adventures in liberal land when he was a college student. Scott did nearly 20 years in the military and had a bright future if he wanted to stay for 30. But he packed up and walked away. And one day I said to him, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Because the military has become so politicized. The only people who get an opportunity to advance are the people who are essentially political. This is not about fighting wars. It is about being a good party soldier, a Democrat Party soldier." Think about this. We have a woman who's been elevated, and I think she's in the Navy, but she has no actual experience other than the fact that she's a woman and she's been tight with Hillary and Barack Obama. And there's been some criticism there. And then I had a chance to talk to a young fellow by the name of Joe Tillelli a few years ago. He is the grandson of the former middleweight champion of the world, Joey Giardello, who has since passed on. But I got a chance to talk to Joe and some of his fellow Marines one morning in a diner. A friend of mine was running a charity at the time to support our veterans who were returning from war zones. And Joe and one of his other friends, a fellow by the name of Joe Panfile, these two Marines, had come home from war, and I got introduced to them in this diner one morning over breakfast to talk about the charity. And they both confirmed exactly what my friend Scott had said about the Army, saying it's happening in the Marine Corps too, and that a lot of good people have walked away. So Donald Trump isn't wrong. Donald Trump is spot on when he brings these things up. And he's obviously getting feedback like that too as well. And I'll add to this. I get a monthly email. It's from a retired lieutenant general. That means he had 3 stars. And he works for a large forum. I think it's called the Atlantic Forum. And he's doing a presentation here in a matter of days, but I got an email preview of it. What he is saying is that the Army has become so top-down in its management that he said, well, you don't want a private or you don't want a first lieutenant, who will come along and question your battle plans. That's true. You have to have some conformity. However, he said no one wants any longer to listen to anyone else because, of course, they're all there for political reasons. And I contrast this. A year ago, I read a book. It was a biography of Curtis LeMay, who was the great air warrior during World War II, helped destroy Europe and broke the will of the Nazis, and then helped break the will of the Japanese in World War II after the battle in Europe was settled. He used to have his pilots come back from their missions, and he would simply have them come into a meeting room, and they were allowed to say anything they wanted to him. Now, he made the ultimate decisions, but as a leader, he needed the feedback, and he welcomed the feedback, and it wasn't always pretty. Sometimes they told him off. Sometimes they told him he was wrong. Sometimes they told him he was getting people killed unnecessarily. But he was able to use that feedback and successfully then turn it around and make better plans. So these are things that Donald Trump would likely be aware of if he's getting any decent advice out there. And I'm telling you right now, the Clinton crime family is going to try to do everything they can now to discredit what Trump said last night. Because here you go. This is from Judge Andrew Napolitano writing today at the Washington Times. He says, at one point during the interrogation by FBI agents, the agents tried to trick Clinton, as the law permits them to do. Before the interrogation began, agents took the hard copy of an innocuous email Mrs. Clinton had sent to an aide, and then they marked it secret. Then at her interrogation, they asked her whether she recognized the email and its contents. She said she did not recognize it, but questioned the secret denomination and pointed out to the agents that nothing remotely secret was in the email. By examining the contents of the email to see whether it contained state secrets, which it clearly did not, Mrs. Clinton demonstrated an awareness of the law. This added to the case against her because she later told the FBI that she had never paid attention to whether a document contained state secrets or not. In the strange world of espionage prosecution, this denial of intent is an admission of guilt. By denying that she had paid attention to notes and margins designating the presence of secrets, by denying that she recognized a secret when she saw one, and by denying what the location of planned drone strikes is secret, she succeeded in avoiding incriminating herself. But she broke the law, according to Judge Napolitano. There's much, much more here this morning that I could tell you all about. Here is a from the Washington Examiner explaining why the polls are tightening. And it just simply says nobody is obviously trusting her any longer. Here's the Wall Street Journal. The FBI's blind Clinton trust. And the writer of this editorial says the closer we look at the FBI's file on Clinton, the more we wonder if Director James Comey always intended to let her off the hook. The report shows the FBI didn't pursue evidence of potential false statements, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence. Mr. Comey's concessions start with his decision not to interview Mrs. Clinton until the end of the investigation, a mere 3 days before he announced his report. This against standard operating procedure, we should point out. I've got a couple of more here if you have not yet heard about these. This one is what really caught my attention this morning when I was sitting down at my desk. And it points out Hillary Clinton purchased some of the BlackBerries she used. This is from the Daily Caller. As Secretary of State, now you know what a BlackBerry is, some of you do, on eBay. She was purchasing BlackBerries on eBay and then turning around and using these and going back and forth emailing classified information from her own private email. And this is from Jason Chaffetz, the great congressman from Utah. He said, I don't want to get into this too much, but part of what was happening with the Secretary of State is she was acquiring technology that wasn't even supported by BlackBerry. You couldn't buy it. She was actually buying this stuff off of eBay because somebody was selling their old machine. That was Chaffetz speaking yesterday at a forum in Washington. There's an hour-long video of that available, of his remarks, if you go to the Daily Caller's website today. Clinton Foundation officials, also from the Daily Caller, Mark Tapscott writing, reportedly skirted or ignored federal laws and regulations while converting the controversial nonprofit form, or from its tax-exempt purpose of building a presidential library, into a $2 billion global machine selling political influence and access on an unprecedented scale, according to documents reviewed by the Daily Caller. And there's 3 or 4 more pages of that story. So, folks, decision's coming up in about 60 days. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I've got more on this story coming up. Also, Ken Menzel scheduled to join us in about 15 minutes. Angry Democrats are complaining this morning that NBC's Matt Lauer, that he went off the farm last night, that he didn't follow his marching orders as any good liberal media spokesman for the Clinton campaign is supposed to do. However, when Clinton told that little fib or big lie about classified documents being emailed, Lauer didn't follow up. So they're trying to, again, cover up for the fact that their girl is quickly circling the drain, and they'll do anything they can. It's Trump's fault. It's Matt Lauer's fault. This is the first time anybody in media has apparently not covered completely for her, even though, as I say, he didn't follow up with a tough question. Telephone callers, I'll get to you in just a moment. Just a quick reminder. It's 53 coming up on 8:25, and I've got to tell you, our friends at Ramsey Heating and Electric remind you that these colder nights probably are a good time to start testing out that furnace. And if you've got a problem with your furnace, you need to give them a call. Call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric today. They'll come out and make sure the job is done, any repairs you need, and they'll do it right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Well, Zygmunt Brzezinski, he wrote the book Between Two Ages, and was instrumental in creating, along with the Rockefellers, the Trilateral Commission. And that's coming to fruition with the Trans-Pacific Partnership with the Pacific Rim countries. And also, of course, we're also negotiating that we don't hear much about, this one with the EU, which would give you the three components, us with Europe, us with the Pacific Rim. That's the trilateral part of it. And these people, it's just part of a plan for globalization, regional government to start with. But just to remind readers out there, there may be a vote on this Trans-Pacific Partnership earlier than we realize.
Oh, I think it'll happen right after Election Day during the lame duck session.
Yeah, right. And so somebody said, well, they'll wait till after the first of the year, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so that's not very far down the road. And right now, from what I can tell, Risch is really on, wishy-washy. You can't get a straight answer from him, but only 5 of the 29 chapters have anything to do with trade, and it's highly regulated trade. There's nothing free about it. And the other 24 chapters have about economic and political merger with all these Pacific Rim countries. And it's 5,554 pages. Nobody's read the thing. It's a highly secret document. Brzezinski and others were involved in this, putting this thing together. And our congressmen and senators couldn't even, they had to go to a secret room, basically, or in the basement of the Congress back there, and they couldn't take any notes out with them. So this is the kind of government that we've had. And if we get Hillary, it'll be more of the same, if not worse.
Well said. I thank you much for the telephone call. Those countries that they are trying to negotiate that treaty with, or they did negotiate, which is still, of course, up in the air, many of them are our old communist foes from the war in Southeast Asia during the 1960s and 70s. President Obama is in Laos, where he is giving them a big reparations payment, I guess as a thank you to the fact that they tortured and killed a great many Americans captured during the war in Southeast Asia. And he was asked about Donald Trump, but of course he took an opportunity to, while in front of other world leaders, and after being humiliated in China last week, he took an opportunity to attack Trump.
I have confidence that if, in fact, people just listen to what he has to say and look at his track record, or lack thereof, that they'll make a good decision. I don't think the guy's qualified to be president of the United States. And every time he speaks, that opinion is confirmed. Just listen to what he says and follow up and ask questions about what appear to be either contradictory or uninformed or outright wacky ideas.
I'm not going to share everything he said for time constraints, but he also said that we've been overblowing this thing about China disrespecting him, forcing him to come out of the back end of the plane, no red carpet. Well, we also have Iranians who are still challenging us on the high seas. Yesterday, I was getting my dinner ready when I heard on the news that the Russians had actually flown close to one of our, probably a spy plane. So you've got all of these provocations going on all over the world. Now, maybe we shouldn't be in some parts of the world. That's an argument for a lot of libertarians and folks out there today. But this fellow is criticizing Trump after he has been routinely humiliated by leaders from other parts of the world, especially in China last week. You may have heard what the president of the Philippines called him an SOB, and had a few other choice words for him as well. These people show no respect for that man, and he's here telling us that Trump's not qualified. What has he done over the last 7.5 years? The economy is stalled still. He printed up a lot of cash, and they threw it all around to a lot of his cronies in the solar energy business, who squandered it, then declared bankruptcy, and then the big salaries they took, they just wheeled around and gave some of that back as campaign contributions. He's been running a scam this whole time. Somebody's got to call him on it sooner or later. We have a short break coming up. Hey, got a visitor coming in from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in just a moment. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. 54 at 8:30.